Professor Ilhan Yildiz is a visiting professor at BYU, researching both here at BYU and the University of Utah, researching the topic, the connect of modernity, religion, and family, both in Salt Lake City and Van, Turkey. An evaluation about modernity, religion, and religious education. This project is supported by Scientific and Technical Research Council of Turkey and the Turkey Academy of Sciences and Professor Yildiz's university in Turkey. He has also taught religious education, family, child education, and the history and experience of religious education. Today his lecture is entitled The Religious Groups and Their Challenges in Turkey. We appreciate your attendance and now turn the time to Professor Yildiz.
Off. Good afternoon. The purpose of this paper is to give general information about the Islamic groups and their challenges in Turkey, and then to examine the Muslim majority and their challenges. Subsequently, this paper will also try to evaluate the situation of non-Muslim minorities. To begin with, we will discuss the Islamic groups in Turkey. The first group is the Alawites. Okay. With between 8 and 9 million members, the Alawites are a Muslim sect that makes up more than 15% of Turkish Muslims. They are concentrated in eastern Turkey and in large cities such as Istanbul and Ankara. Alawite is a blanket term for a large number of different heterodox communities, such as Turkmens, Yörük, and Tahtacı, whose actual beliefs and ritual practices differ much. Most Alawites are ethnically and linguistically Turkic, mainly of Turkmen descent from central and eastern Anatolia. Some 20% of Alawites are Kurds, and some 25% of Kurds in Turkey are Alawite. Turkish Alawites' rituals differ considerably from Sunni Islam and Orthodox Shiism, but their basic beliefs and actually quite similar to both. Prayer, the fast in Ramadan, alms, and the pilgrimage are alien practices to most Alawite communities. Instead, they have their own religious ceremonies at which men and women worship together through speeches, poetry, and dance. These ceremonies are officiated by holy men belonging to a hereditary priestly caste. The Alawites have traditionally been some of the strongest supporters of secularism in Turkey, and they are highly politicized and well organized. Some of the Alawites do not accept the Department of Religious Affairs in Turkey because Alawites do not presently enjoy recognition by that governing body. Moreover, in contrast to Sunni clerics, there are no government salaried Alawite clerics. The government considers all branches of Islam as one faith and hence does not address Alawite concerns specifically. The requests of the Alawites to the Turkish government include the following: an Alawite committee in the Presidency of Religious Affairs, official consideration of the Alawites in the distribution of state funding through the Department of Religious Affairs and other bodies, the provision of Alawite religious education in schools, and broadcasting time on radio and television in order to disseminate Alawite culture. The second group is the Sufi orders, or in Turkish, tariqat. The most important Sufi orders are Naqshbandis, Mevlevis, Qadiris, Cerrahiye, Rifais, and Bektaşis. You can see on the screen. Members of these orders traditionally live in monastic communities as lay brothers. Only a minority of Turks would consider themselves to be members of an order, and they have varying degrees of commitment to their individual orders. Muslim Sufi orders vary in different areas and change over time, but each includes a set of roles that both the masters and the disciples must play. Sufi groups seek to focus on the individual character, such as religious consciousness and freedom from social and political limitations. Though each order is different, the major orders share some common characteristics. To begin with, they exhibit a strong group mentality. Members help each other, and in return, the group expects complete loyalty from its members, who pledge allegiance to the group's charismatic leader. They devote much of their time and energy to the will of the leader. These orders have traditionally activated believers in a spiritual sense by bringing them back to their true religion, and in a political sense by leading the fight against colonialism and other foreign influences. They have continued to play this role in Turkey by training and educating Muslims. The Turkish Muslims' understanding of Islam is based on Sufi concepts. For example, both the National Outlook movement of Necmettin Erbakan and Nurcu movements emerged from Naqshbandi Sufi orders. Because these orders were banned in 1935, none of them has achieved legal status. This lack of legal status has not meant that the orders have no institutionalized presence in Turkey. There are a large number of associations, foundations, and business enterprises that generally have names that bear no direct reference to one of the orders, but which are undoubtedly active on their behalf. These orders have published newspapers, fund numerous corporations, as well as healthcare centers, and set up broadcasting stations for radio and television. In addition to their media organizations, they have set up tourist businesses which arrange pilgrimages, among other things. They are visibly active in the finance sector and have set up private teaching establishments in several cities to prepare students for entry to primary and middle schools. In spite of the legal ban, these orders have been tolerated by the various governments in the past as long as they kept out of public affairs. Government tolerance of these orders in the past has not been surprising, since they were active in the conservative and religiously oriented parties. These parties have always perceived the orders, numbering several hundred thousand, as a reservoir of potential voters. This perception naturally qualifies the notion that they are tolerated by the government as long as they keep out of public affairs. However, they were quite active until February 28, 1997, when the state cracked down on them and essentially stopped their activities. Another group is comprised of the Islamic movements in Turkey. New Islamic movements, including the Işıkçıs, Nurcus, and Süleymancıs, first emerged in public in about 1940. Using very traditional methods, Islamic movements utilize inner and outer purification to develop individual self-discipline in order to simulate Islamic consciousness. Self-discipline is developed through prayer, fasting, reading the Quran, and donating to the poor and needy. There are many social changes that have come about through Islamic movements. They seek to promote these changes along with the use of the modern concepts of democracy, nationalism, and secularism. Common to all of them is their objection to authoritarian secularism and their support for an Islamic freedom. By the 1940s, this had led to numerous court cases against members of the Islamic movements. Islamic movements refuse to accept both the official religion of the state and the lack of modernization advocated by traditional Islamic codes. Instead, they promote the defense of individual and social rights against cultural and political assimilation by the state. The most important group among them is the Nurjus. In their public relations work, the Nurjus attached great importance to the presentation of a new interpretation of the Quran in keeping with the times. Said Nursi, the founder of Nurjus, wrote the Epistles of Light between 1910 and 1960. The Risale-i-Nur is described as a logical and scientifically based concept for dealing with the problems and challenges that increasingly face Muslims in the modern world. It is read by people from all social, ethnic, and economic circumstances. The Risale-i-Nur became the basis of Nur movement, with between 5 and 6 million Nurjus, or followers of the Nur movement. It is the strongest and the largest movement of its kind in Turkey. The Nur movement transformed the traditional oral-based religious thought to a print-based form. Followers of the Nur movement meet twice a week to read the Risale-i-Nur and discuss its subjects. Some of these groups, known as Nur Dershanes, are comprised entirely of work colleagues, while others include members from all different types of work and social situations. College students make up the majority of the people meeting at Nur Dershanes. There are around 5,500 of these Nur Dershanes, which meet in different apartments and neighborhoods throughout Turkey. Comparable to the Sufi orders, Islamic movements use both modern and traditional communication networks to develop new arguments for the construction of newly imagined identities and worldviews. Since social movements target the media, economy, and information industry, they favor active participation in all facets of life. They have published newspapers, fund numerous associations, and set up broadcasting stations for the media. In addition to their media activities, they are visibly active in the finance sector, sponsor healthcare centers, and have set up private teaching institutions in several cities to prepare students for college. They have also established many private schools from preschool to university. The most powerful Nurju movement was started by Fethullah Gülen, a prominent leader who had an impact on education. Fethullah Gülen, gave a new interpretation to Islam that was able to unite Turkish and Islamic traditions with modernity. However, his interpretation took a fairly critical and dynamic approach to both Islamic tradition and modernity. Gülen's movement affected the Turkish community to the same degree that the community affected the movement. He has established 200 high schools and 7 universities throughout Turkey, the Turkic republics in Asia and Europe, including 50 private high schools and 79 university preparatory courses in Turkey. Even though the Turkish government prohibited them, Islamic movements have been able to take on an increasingly legal character because of the changing political situation since the Second World War. Interestingly, they have also become a significant religious force because of the declarations of movement leaders, which support the army and the state. The Islamic movements have not developed along the lines of a political party, preferring to exert their influence through the support of certain political circles. In the 1950s, this was the Democratic Party. In the 1960s, it was Justice Party. From the 1980s onward, the Truepat Party and the Motherland Party. However, as with the Sufi orders, on February 28, 1997, the state stopped their activities. In spite of the government restrictions on their activities, these movements have changed their tactics and continue to grow in influence and importance. There are many different Islamic groups in Turkey, but most Turks simply consider themselves Muslims, not belonging to any specific group, although they are, for the majority, Sunni Muslims. There are a few dormant fundamentalist groups in Turkey, but in practice, the vast majority of Turkish Muslims support greater democracy and secularism. The most important challenge in Turkey is the issue of secularism. The Republic of Turkey interprets secularism to mean the strict separation of government and religious affairs. According to Article 2 of the Turkish Constitution of 1982, the Republic of Turkey is a secular state founded on the rule of law. The constitutional principle of secularism, generally translated as laiklik, was added to the Turkish Constitution in 1937. The preamble to the 1982 Constitution established secularism by declaring that religion should not be a part of politics or government. The Turkish constitutional principle of secularism was patterned after the French model of the separation of church and state that took effect following the French Revolution. Because secularism emerged as one of the key principles of the new Turkish state, religious groups came under firm government supervision and control. The purpose of this strict secularism is to replace the traditional Islamic lifestyles with a modern Western value system. In conjunction with the principle of secularism, the Department of Religious Affairs, an organization connected to the Prime Minister, was formed in 1924 and given the responsibility of administering religious affairs. The function of this organization is to carry out activities related to the beliefs of Islam and the principles of worship and morality, to enlighten society on the subjects of religious issues, and to manage the places of worship. In the towns and cities, the Department of Religious Affairs is represented by religious leaders referred to as Mufti, with its staff of more than 75,000. It is organized to assist Turkish Muslim citizens in Turkey and those working abroad fulfilling their religious services. The Department of Religious Affairs tries to instill the principles of Islam, such as unity, cooperation, and charity. It achieves this by following principles specified in the Constitution of the Republic of Turkey, aiming for national solidarity and transcending all kinds of political views. The principle of secularism is given an institutional safeguard in the form of the Presidency of Religious Affairs, which exercises its duties as prescribed by the law. The presidency should be removed from all political views and ideas, striving for national solidarity and integrity. Instead of simply keeping a check on religion, it has taken control of Islam in Turkey and administers it. Alawites and some extreme secularists claim that this presidency has breached the principle of state neutrality toward religion. But the state claims that only the constitutional principle of secularism prevents Turkey from becoming an entirely religious state. This is one of the reasons for the current debate among different groups, including practically all social organizations concerning the presidency of religious affairs. The second challenge that faces the Muslim majority after the issue of secularism is the definite tension between political articulation of religion and the state. Turkey is the only secular democratic country in the Middle East with a predominantly Muslim population. In spite of this tension in recent decades and the opposition of the government, the Islamic movement has emerged in the public sphere in Turkey. Even though secular groups believe that a fundamentalist government may take control of the country, the reality is that the Turkish Islamic majority only seeks for greater democracy, human rights, and secularism in the manner that has been applied in the West. Approximately 80% of the Turkish population would like to be a part of the European Union and enjoy the same secularism as the West. Beginning in the 1980s, these Muslim groups used the opportunities that were created by economic and political liberalization to foster new pluralist lifestyles and identities. Thus, Islamic movements challenged state-centric identities. Development of media and education increased the effect of Islamic roles in society and caused the redefinition and growth of Islam in Turkey. In addition, media such as newspaper, television, and journals have been utilized by this movement to redefine Islamic identity. The misunderstanding between secular elites and the Muslim majority occasionally leads to conflict. Secular groups have the opinion that religious freedom poses a potential threat to state authority. This attitude was responsible for the 1989 prohibition of female headscarves in public buildings, was responsible for the and the ban of the virtue party in 1998 by the Constitutional Court decisions. According to the decisions, any woman who wears a headscarf for religious reasons in the public buildings, or any politician who uses religious references in his speeches, poses a threat to secularism in Turkey. In the past, Turkey has followed French secular guidelines, but with the recent prohibition of headscarves in France, it seems that currently France is following policies already established in Turkey. In contrast to the American example of secularism in government serving to prevent the mixing of religion and state, all institutions in Turkey serve to guard against religion infiltrating the state. Secular groups make the interesting conclusion that the state gives up human rights and democratic principles in order to protect secularism. Recently, the President of the Supreme Court of Appeals revealed the prevailing fears among secular groups that any person who wants greater religious freedom also wants a fundamentalist government. Also, the third challenge for the Muslim majority is the situation of the Imam Hatip high schools. These high schools were established in accordance with Article 24 of the 1924 Turkish Constitution, which states that all religious and minority education should be given under the supervision of the state. This meant that there was no place for private religious education in Turkey. Imam Hatip schools are government-sponsored public schools with the intent of training clergy for the Department of Religious Affairs. Traditional families want their children to be educated in the schools because they believe the schools teach with the correct balance of modernity and tradition. The curriculum includes teaching religious principles alongside science and literature. However, many secularist Turks maintain that these schools teach doctrines that go against national secular ideals. Because of this, on August 16, 1997, the Turkish Grand National Assembly closed all Imam Hatip middle schools, allowing only the high schools to continue. In addition, the government gave the orders that any graduate of the Imam Hatip high schools would have no other choice but to study theology for their higher education. As a result of the government's actions, enrollment decreased dramatically over the years. You can see on the screen. In the 1995-1996 school year, there were 495,580 students enrolled in Imam Hatip schools. In the 2001-2002 year, a mere 71,583 students were enrolled. Turkey's population is 99% Muslim. The remaining 1% are Jewish, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, and other Christians. The situation of non-Muslim minorities in Turkey is extremely complex in light of the prevailing legal framework. The official view of the state is that different regulations apply to the various non-Muslim religious communities. There are three types of status for non-Muslim minority groups in Turkey. The first consists of recognized minorities according to the Peace Treaty of Lausanne. These are exclusively the Armenians, Bulgarians, Greeks, and Jews. At the Lausanne Treaty, the recognized minority groups in Turkey obtained the right to open church-owned private schools. These minorities have schools beginning at preschool and continuing through high school. The principals of these schools are Turkish and they receive their salaries from the government. However, only minorities are allowed to attend such schools, and all other expenditures are paid for by the minorities. These minorities have faced some challenges. According to the recognized minorities, the greatest difficulty in Turkey is the Minorities Committee. For example, the law states that the Armenian Patriarchate of Istanbul, the Greek Orthodox Ecumenical Patriarchate of Istanbul, and the Chief Rabbinate of Turkey do not exist, and neither do their positions. The two patriarchs and the chief rabbi have never been granted official status as legal authorities. All related state business is conducted by the responsible departments of the Ministry of Interior, based on resolutions passed by the Minorities Committee in accordance with its own interpretation of the traditions of these religious communities. This committee is supposedly the state body with the greatest authority over minorities. Minorities must receive permission from this committee for any activity, but it is hard to obtain. For example, when a minority school applied to go to summer camp, the committee turned down their request in the interest of national security. The decisions of the committee are final. They cannot be challenged by the courts and cannot be appealed by minorities. The second challenge for patriarchates is the limitations of eligibility for the clergy in Turkey. Only Turkish nationals can be appointed bishops or patriarchs. The only exceptions are the Roman Catholic Church and congregations attached to diplomatic missions. The Orthodox community has faced significant difficulties regarding this issue in recent times. For example, the Heybeliada Seminary was established in 1844 to train clerics and provide religious unity among Orthodox communities. However, after 127 years of religious education, this school was closed in 1971, as Article 24 of the Turkish Constitution came into effect, joining all private schools to the state. Another political reason for closing the school was Greece and Bulgaria's sanctions on Turkish minorities. In response to these sanctions, Turkey declared that religious and moral education must be given by the state, and no religious organization can open private schools for higher education. In 1971, the Fener Patriarchy didn't want to join the Heybeliada Seminary with the state and consequently closed the school. Recently, the Armenian Patriarch Mutafian suggested connecting the Rum Orthodox Theology Department with the Theological Faculty of Istanbul for training Christian clerics. After the Higher Education Council enforced their dress code regulations requiring nuns to remove their headscarves, the project was discontinued. In this way, minorities who were given some rights in the Peace Treaty of Lausanne have also had to live under the prohibitions of Turkey's unique secularism. A third challenge that these minority leaders face is that they have no regular income from the community or the state. This problem can hardly be solved by the communities, as long as there is no legal connection between the communities on the one hand and the religious leadership on the other. These institutions are maintained by community foundations which act as the property owners and are only accountable to the state. Armenian, Greek, and Jewish foundations were not allowed to buy or sell property after 1936. However, in order to meet European Union membership requirements, the government declared in August 2002 that Armenian, Greek, and Jewish foundations could buy and sell properties with permission from the Ministers' Council. In addition, they can now be members of foundations outside of Turkey. The second group is the non-Muslim minorities who were present in Turkey at the time of the Treaty of Lausanne, but were not recognized by the state as minorities within the treaty. These are, for example, the Syrian Orthodox Church and Catholic United Churches, such as the Calvin Church, the Syrian Catholic Church, and the Roman Catholic Church. A major difficulty for these minorities is training priests and teachers of religion. The Arab Orthodox Church and the Syrian Orthodox Church, for example, have organized their property as community foundations under civil law. But unlike the recognized non-Muslim minorities, the Syrian Orthodox Church is not allowed to use its monasteries for educational purposes. Yet, these monasteries have never held any school-level education, only the basic training of priests and religious teachers. The government has recognized the right of these churches, but they have not been allowed to use these buildings or properties for fundraising, only for religious purposes. Third group of minorities is the non-Muslim religious communities that only became active in Turkey after the conclusion of the Treaty of Lausanne. Examples are the Protestant free churches and Jehovah's Witnesses. They have not been able to establish churches or other institutions, including schools. As a result, only minorities recognized by the Turkish government obtain the right to open church-owned private schools in Turkey under the guarantees of the Peace Treaty of Lausanne. According to this agreement, certain minorities, especially Christians and Jews, have privileged rights. Minorities included in the Peace Treaty of Lausanne can establish new religious institutions. The Turkish government has limited the number of minority groups that were guaranteed these rights to those that were established at the time of the Peace Treaty of Lausanne. In August 2000, Turkey also signed the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights regarding minority rights. Despite the privileged minority status of certain groups, all of them still must deal with some prohibitions in connection to Turkish secularism. The situation of religious freedom in Turkey is likely to change soon. Turkey was wanted to become part of the European Union for a long time, but only recently has it appeared to be possible. Entry talks start late this year, but first Turkey must improve on its human rights and living standards. In order to meet European Union norms, the previous Turkish government amended the constitution to abolish the death penalty, give language and other rights to the Kurdish people, and drop restrictions on the press. However, the biggest stumbling block has remained the army's role in the politics, which exists mainly to keep the Islamists out. The Justice and Development Party has recently taken charge of the government. Under the new administration, many laws granting rights to the religious minorities have been proposed. Recognized or unrecognized, all religious minorities in Turkey may open new places of worship as long as they obtain a permit from the local governments. 160 non-Muslim minority foundations have opened since last year's passage of Regulation 25003. Furthermore, the Prime Minister recently redefined the role of the Minority Committee with the goal of assisting minorities rather than patrolling them. Turkey ratified legal changes that drastically reduced the role of the army in Turkish politics in response to the 7th European Union requirement, which was to change the constitution of Turkey. Under the old rules, the civilian cabinet had to meet the Turkish General Staff each month in the National Security Council. They would then discuss an agenda drawn up by the general who controlled the National Security Council Secretary. The democratically elected Turkish government could choose to ignore National Security Council instructions with the risk of losing their positions. In the future, however, the Chief Secretary will be a civilian deputy Prime Minister and will decide when the National Security Council meets. Along with the Justice and Development Party, Islamic movements make many efforts to unite Turkey with the modern values of the Western world, partly by viewing Islam from a modern political perspective. The dominion of nationalism and the Islamic codes are contested by Islamic movements who focus on the protection of civil rights for large groups as well as individuals. The country of Turkey has been a very important crossroad between Europe and Asia for centuries, not only because of its location, but also because of cultures and religions that have traversed its land. This juncture of civilization has helped develop the society of Turkey today politically and culturally. Turkey has had a democracy for almost a century now. Admittedly, many problems have challenged the young republic and have forced it to adjust. However, such adjustments have made it a stronger and safer place for the citizens of the country. Changes in a democracy are expected and indicate progress. Turkey's progression has been substantial, especially in its recent goals for entrance into the European Union. It has shown a commitment to create a better environment for its many citizens, especially shown in its increasing religious freedoms and toleration for all religions. As a model for other Islamic countries who may wish to adopt democracy, Turkey is proof that an Islamic majority and democracy can truly coexist in peace. Thank you very much.
We have a few minutes before the end of the hour, the class hour that is. If any of you have a question you'd like to pose, please feel free.
Yes, do your statistics reflect Turkey proper or also the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus?
Is the numbers, or do they include Cyprus as well, or just?
No. Yeah, it is not included in Cyprus.
I was wondering, does Turkey have laws against conversion by Muslims to Christian and other non-Muslim religions, as do a lot of other Muslim countries, or do they not have such laws?
Yeah, after European Union, with European Union requirements, Turkey changed the constitution, and now any religion can come to Turkey and can open, churches and other religious, facilities, and they can, explain their religions is free.
He was asking, can a Muslim in Turkey convert to Christianity? Is that legal?
Yes, legal.
The United States, our current presidential administration, encourages the cooperation between faith-based organizations and the government in providing social services. I was wondering if such cooperation takes place in Turkey.
Can churches, can they administer social programs? Can they be in charge of social welfare programs?
Yeah, United States, I heard that want to work with Turkey. Turkey has moderate religious beliefs, and Turkey is not radical. I mean, not fundamentalist country. And Turkey is a very good example for, Middle Eastern countries. And United States, especially, President George Bush suggested the Prime Minister of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, when he came to United States for visit, and he wanted from him they will cooperate to reorganize the new Islamic phase for a model for Middle Eastern countries. Turkish Islam is not radical but moderate, and Turkey is politically, culturally, and intellectually the fastest growing nation in the Middle East.